All right, so today we are on the UCLA campus and we have the great opportunity to meet with Dr. Carlos Alberto Torres, who is Distinguished Professor of Education and also UNESCO UCLA Chair in Global Learning and Global Citizenship Education. Thank you so much for joining Global Citizenship Interview Series. It's a pleasure to be with you.
My pleasure.
All right, so the first question is a pretty straightforward question, and actually there are two questions, and they are interconnected. What is, in your opinion, global citizenship education, and what is global citizenship?
Global citizenship education resulted, as you well know, from the 2012 declaration of the GEFI, the Global Initiative. That was the first time a UN Secretary produced a declaration on education. Now, the GEFI, as you also know, is based on three principles. One is access, which is typical of the whole discussion on education. The second one is quality. And the third one, which is not intimately related with these two, but is related as well, has to do with promoting global citizenship.
Right.
So the question was never about global citizenship education, it was about global citizenship. And global citizenship in this GEFI initiative has to do with this idea of a common humanity, which was then adopted as a framework by UNESCO.
Right.
Why UNESCO? Because UNESCO took this responsibility of global citizenship, and being UNESCO added education.
Right.
Naturally, one could argue that global citizenship can pertain to many fields. We are talking about global citizenship education because we are in the School of Education, because we have connection with UNESCO, etc. But to be very precise,
Right.
the discussion on global citizenship can be obtained and developed throughout multiple fields, not only education. The question is how you implement global citizenship education in curriculum instruction, then creates an entirely new model.
Interesting. All right, this ties in a way to a next question, which is how the notion of global citizenship and Freire's pedagogy are interconnected, in your opinion.
Well, I just made the argument in class, and you hear that Freire started as a typical provincial. He was raising awareness as a provincial, but he was a local person.
Right.
And he enjoyed very much being from the Northeast. He was somebody who had an extraordinary perspicacy, had extraordinary capacity to observe.
Right.
One of the things that impressed me about him is how he will look at reality in ways that not everybody will, and discover things in this reality, and then make answers to himself in this course of exploration about this reality that he's observing.
Right.
That he could put in ways, because of his prose and his almost poetic epistemology, that will capture the imagination of other people. So in that way, he began to move in very practical domains,
Right.
being a very unpractical man. He never learned how to drive, for instance. Not a terrible thing, but I don't think he was practical in the ways that people are.
Right.
But he was practical in the way that people are not. He knew how to produce social transformation.
Right.
And he did that by inventing a system, I call it the Paulo Freire system, and he himself and the group of early collaborators in a famous journal of 1963 that was published in the University of Recife at the time, now the University of Pernambuco, call it the Paulo Freire system. What is this? This was a system of bringing people back into school access, but also letting them move on parallel levels, non-formal, informal, formal education, until they reach a pinnacle, which will be the university. But this university already begins to show some of the elements of global citizenship. Now, here we have this provincial individual that probably would never have been so well known
Yeah.
if he would not have been kicked out of his own country by the dictatorship.
Right.
And then he became this larger than history figure, and actually he deserved that. Not only because he was a genius of the 20th century, but because his ability to capture the collective imagination of people and the way he will connect the writings of others, from Bergson to Freud, and then the parallels with Gramsci were tremendous.
Yes.
All of those things made him a top of the line intellectual, very close to what I consider foundational on his work, which is the critical theory a la Frankfurt.
Right.
Although he may not have been a follower of Adorno or Horkheimer, he was very much into looking at Marcuse, looking at some question of Erich Fromm, etc.
Right.
In short, I think he moved from being the local to be the global, and in that dialogue between the global and the local, he himself became a global figure on what he called himself a pilgrim of the obvious, and being the obvious that oppression and oppressors and oppressed exist in other parts of the world. But let me add one more point,
Sure.
which I developed slightly in my keynote as ending my presidency in the World Council of Comparative Education Society, and it was published in 6 languages online. But the point we have in Latin America is a liberal tradition.
Right.
This liberal tradition comes from the moment of independence, around 1810, more or less. This liberal tradition left a great group of intellectuals, particularly in Argentina,
Yeah.
to think that education was a solution very much into the spirit of the Enlightenment to tame human nature.
Right.
And there was this individual, Sarmiento, a very controversial man, self-made man, somebody who was autodidact, that created the concept of popular education and then applied to public education.
Right.
Sarmiento put this as a precondition for citizenship. So education and citizenship were immediately connected, and this is the typical model of the scientifically connected with the tradition of positivism, politically connected with the tradition
Right.
of empiricism, and particularly liberalism. But Sarmiento was also a comparativist, perhaps the first comparativist in Latin America, and I'm not so sure if not in the world, because he will take what he knew and apply that knowledge to what he didn't know, which
Right.
is what comparative
Right.
education does. So out of Sarmiento, you have then the creation of the post-colonial,
Right.
but liberal citizen, and the problem with this liberalism is that create an homogeneous citizen rather than a diverse citizen.
Right.
This is roughly, to put it around the 1860s to 1880s. That's the generation I'm talking about.
Sure.
Exactly 60 years to 70 years later,
Yeah.
it comes Freire. And Freire will not confront this tradition. He was pretty much a liberal Democrat at heart. But he will confront this element of a post-colonial tradition that was not post-colonial enough. And the fact, because yes, Sarmiento didn't like the Spanish. He liked the French.
Right.
He liked the Americans, but not the Spanish, because the Spanish was the colonizer.
Right.
But with Freire, we have a different, and the beginning of a new tradition. The argument that pedagogy of the oppressed was the precondition to make this liberal, democratic citizen a true global citizen.
Right.
And that's the reason that Freire then became, perhaps unwittingly, a global citizen, a global thinker. To finish, when Freire was in the last stages of his life, and one of my students in one dissertation, we have a great deal of Freirean dissertations
Right.
since of my presence in this school, has a beautiful sentence that not many people have really pay attention to it. It's a complicated sentence, so I may not be able to remember all by memory, but it says something like this. I was born in in Pernambuco, and I was born in the city of Recife, so my Recificity explained my Pernambucability. My Pernambucability explains my Brazilianism. My Brazilianism explains my Latin Americanism.
Right.
My Latin Americanism explains that I'm a citizen of the world. And then he says, you will not be able to understand me if you don't understand Recife, but you will not be able to understand me if you don't understand my other configuration.
So we discussed global citizenship education, global citizenship, how in a way it is connected to Freire's pedagogy. I'd like to share with you this, this question. What kind of recommendations would you like to share with teachers who are actually engaged in teaching global citizenship, either explicitly or implicitly in the courses and programs, and how they can actually, in your opinion, based on your long time teaching experience, teach global citizenship to their students?
Well, a teacher, if she's a good teacher, is by definition an internationalist who internationalizes things. When you are teaching basic knowledge, mathematics, language, etc., in the end you are opening up the possibility for people to have a menu a la carte of what the world has to offer. The problem is when you are not a good teacher or you manipulate consciousness, and we have cases of teachers who teach in places far away. When I was teaching in Canada, there was a famous case. We in the University of Alberta began to receive a number of very talented youth coming from a particular area far away from Edmonton up north, that happened to be trained like fascists.
Right.
So somebody really figured out I had to do with a teacher of social sciences who happened to also be the mayor of the city, and he has a lot of credibility. So there are studies about this case.
Right.
Kind of circumscribed group.
Yeah.
Somebody manipulating consciousness, you can create a model of the world which is the opposite of what we want to achieve. So my first element here is you have to recognize your power, but also recognize your power for emancipation, but also to recognize your limitations. The second aspect is that no good teacher is ever a good teacher unless he or she engage in researching about the topics that he or she is teaching.
Right.
The connection between research and teaching cannot be severe. If that's the case, your teaching is always obsolete by definition.
Right.
The third element is that in the Freirean spirit, a good teacher is also a good learner, is also a very good student, and the teacher-student, student-teacher relationship in the classroom need to be upheld. Finally, I will say that a very good teacher in teaching these concepts should recognize the value of the student in terms of the knowledge that the student brings to the classroom. What Freire one day defined as the native knowledge, the original knowledge of the student, what I will define in the way like Freire would have said it, which is they know, right? They did not know that they knew.
Right.
And that concept of this knowledge that comes with experience and just to be a human being needs to be respected. That is substantial for teachers. And finally, of course, in addition to all of these things, if you can convey to your student and also learn from your student the thirst for knowledge and social justice education, much better.
That would be a good combination.
An absolutely good combination.
What are your challenges in teaching principles of global citizenship in your classes, in your daily teachings? Would be interesting to know.
Well, there are many challenges to anyone in any condition. As you know, we have created for the last 2 years and they're already in our menu a la carte of courses. 3 courses connected with the progression. The first one is globalization and learning, which is taught by Richard Desjardins, a very distinguished political economist. The second one, which is global citizenship, which I teach, and the third one is curriculum instruction in global citizenship, that is taught by Jason Dolio, who is himself a certified high school teacher for California. If you want to know the curriculum of this course, well, the first one is the problem, the second one is the solution, and the third course is the implementation of the solution in the classroom. So, what are the problems that we face? Well, number one, this is the US. The US, believe it or not, is quite insular. And this insularity makes sure that when you talk about education, in a school of education, the concern is the local culture, the local dynamics. The situation of the US is about race, and this conflation between race and class, and of course spilling over with other quote-unquote variables like gender, like disability, like sexual preference or sexual choice. All these elements account for the dynamics of teaching and learning at the local level, and they are very fundamental. The schools of education like this one, which itself defines as a social justice education, department of education, at least the School of Education has 2 departments, I will argue that first and foremost the focus is on minority populations, on people of color, what people Freire will call the oppressed, and the situation now in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles communities. Moving into policy is the question of the state of California, which is a very progressive state, and what happened in Sacramento. Moving into the same spirit, some, not all of my colleagues are concerned about the question of the federal state and the implication for education. All together account for a very US-based model. People who teach outside this paradigm are respected and appreciated, but they are not the dominant voice, and I'm one of them. So in this school, I will consider 3 or 4 of us teaching outside this local paradigm into the dialectics of the global and the local. So that is another challenge. A third challenge, in addition to the hidden curriculum of the American universities, which keeps changing with the historicity of thought and the actual conflicts of the society, is the fact that schooling is becoming less and less useful for the students. Because we know that we are educating a number of people that over time they may become unemployed despite of their qualifications. We are moving towards a jobless society. Robotics and artificial intelligence is going to replace a lot of the work that humans do. So facing with that challenge, my sense is that the schools of education, high schools, are completely ignoring that challenge. And somebody like me is preaching in the desert.
Very challenging. All right, very interesting. Well, I'll ask you a last question that is quite broad, and the question is why and in what ways, in your opinion, education will be key in society, and what pathways do you foresee for education in a society that apparently is increasingly dominated by neoliberalism and growing nationalism?
The presence of education enhances the quality of life. And opens up the minds, and if I go with Emiliano Desjardins, he creates a global consciousness, and that link all of us in the new Anthropocene, and in which we have the connection between humans, non-humans, etc. On the other hand, it was Germany, one of the highest educated countries in Europe, that gave us the most remarkable philosophers, historians, art, music that embrace and passionately fascism, which is one of the most irrational systems ever created by the human mind.
Right.
So I have this ambivalence, and I don't think I should endorse a notion so naive that the education is a silver bullet to all
Sure.
failure. On the other hand, Freire never believed that education was the lever for progress or development. But Freire believed, and I endorse this point of view, that without education, you cannot have this process of development. In other terms, it's a necessary but not sufficient condition, as the sociologists we used to say. The sufficient condition is always connected with public policy. It's always connected with the choices made in a connection between the civil society and the political society. The third element that I would like to emphasize here is that it's not that we are in a growing neoliberal society. We are now facing 3 generations of neoliberal disciples, people that have been systematically bombarded with the idea, on the one hand, of possessive individualism,
Right.
and that you are so responsible of your own success, and on the other hand, the continuous underestimation and undermining of the networks of solidarity. The question of solidarity now become in the hands of philanthropy, not in the hands of the responsibility of the welfare state.
Right.
So, having said all of that, what do I find in my constant teaching everywhere? If I don't believe in the power of redemption
Yes.
of education, then I shouldn't be in this job.
Sure.
But on the other hand, I should not be naive to imagine that everything, every problem, and this is a problem, every social problem is immediately thrown onto education. It is because education is a failure or because education hasn't done enough. Just to give a very simplistic example, in the domestic debates for the presidency, you know, we have 3 debates in this country by the 2 candidates of the 2 main parties. When Bush was debating with Gore, I personally thought that he was running for the presidency of the teacher union, because everything that he said about the need to modify in domestic policy was about education. The point being that without education it's impossible to really develop a wealthy, productive, innovative, utopian society.
Right.
Education alone cannot do it.
Interesting. All right. And to conclude, what is a global citizen, in your opinion, by using 3 keywords?
Well, the 3 keywords are planet, peace, and people.
Interesting. All right. Okay, thank you very much to Dr. Torres. This was a great opportunity to hear from your experience, your vision for global citizenship education, Freire pedagogy on education, and it was so interesting and very inspiring to be with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.